Welcome back to the Sacred Arts channel, where we talk about all things from the sacred to the practical. I am so excited for this conversation today because we have Sandie Byrne. She is a psychic medium inheriting her mystical talents from a long line of family practitioners. Growing up surrounded by wisdom of her grandmother and great grandmother, both gifted readers and with ancestral roots in the same art, Andy's belief in the afterlife and her ability to guide others on their life path is unwavering. As she shared her gift with others, Sandie became a beacon for those seeking solace from grief and confusion. Her expertise spans across continents, earning her a distinguished reputation as one of the foremost psychic mediums of her generation. Recognized for her exceptional abilities, Sandie has been compared to the renowned Irish psychic medium Eileen Garrett. She has received prestigious honors, including Ireland's Medium of the Year for consecutive years and the esteemed Irish Enterprise Award for Best Psychic and Medium Readings in 2022. Welcome, Sandie.
Well, thank you very much. You know, Jazzy, I'm listening to you talking and I'm kind of thinking, oh, she sounds interesting. I'd love to meet her.
It's always great to have our story kind of reflected back at us because it's
Yeah,
like, oh, yeah,
absolutely.
that is me. I have
Yeah,
done that. You forget.
you do. Absolutely. Yeah. Sounds impressive.
I'm so intrigued by your background because last night we had a family meeting and we were telling stories about our grandmothers and great grandmothers, and we were talking about how they were healers and curanderas. Like in South America we call them curanderas, and I got such uh a fuzzy feeling. So what an amazing gift to be able to have these ancient wisdoms kind of taught to you by your ancestors. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey there, and how did you discover and start embracing your psychic abilities?
So yeah, as I say, I think I'm lucky. Like, I always say that I don't have anything that anybody else has. I don't call any of it gifts. I call them abilities because I think, we all have the ability to connect with spirit in the same way that we have the ability to learn to speak Spanish or German. We have the ability to learn how to communicate with spirit. But it's just that, maybe a lot of our families don't understand or haven't had it in the family, where I was very lucky, that my grandmother was a reader, my great grandmother, and so on and so forth. And actually, I get it from both sides of my family. My grandmother, well, I should say my mother's side of the family, but both from my grandmother and my grandfather, because my grandfather's mother was also a reader and a healer. So I suppose, like any child, okay, I didn't know that what I was seeing or feeling or experiencing was any different, okay, because kids don't know. They think that everybody can see and hear and feel and whatever, and so I've always seen spirit. I don't remember a time where I didn't see spirit around me. Okay. So I was unlucky in one sense in that both my grandmother and my great grandmother were alive when I was born, but my great grandmother died within 2 or 3 years of me being born. And then I was only 7 when my grandmother died. She was only 56 when she passed. So I didn't have them through all those years, but I think the founding that my grandmother gave me as I was a child, my grandmother used to read tea leaves for people. And she taught me to read tea leaves when I was very, very young. So I was a bit of a party guest, bring out the 5-year-old who can read my tea leaves. That I was that girl that people used to bring out, and I was a bit of I suppose an oddity or a curiosity, if you like, that people used to talk. But I'm sorry, I know that I go on a little bit. But the first time that I remember realizing that what I was seeing was different was when I was 7 years old. It was actually at my grandmother's funeral. Okay. So my grandmother passed, as I say, when she was 56. She had a lung disease that was connected to smoking. I don't know exactly what, but I know it was connected to something to the broncholi in the lungs. And she had been on oxygen for a while, but she wasn't expected to go. So she had been taken into hospital because she wasn't feeling well, and we had gone to visit her at the hospital. And while we were there, the doctor gave her an injection, which she didn't take to, and she died very quickly. So my mother went, we had no mobile phones back then. So my mother went to the nurse's office to call her brothers and sisters. My mother's one of 10. We're an Irish Catholic family. So my mother's one of 10. So she went to call her brothers and sisters and left me with my grandmother. And I was chatting away to her. I was talking away to her. And the nurse came in because she heard me talking. She said, "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" And I said, "My nanny." And while I was sitting there, and this was kind of the way my mind worked, I was sitting in the chair holding my grandmother's hand. They told me she'd passed away, but I didn't know what that meant at the time. But at the same time, my grandmother was standing behind me plaiting my hair because my
Mm.
grandmother, I had this really long red curly hair. My grandmother used to love my hair and she used to plait my hair. So she was standing behind me playing with my hair, chatting away to me, not a bother. So at the funeral, a couple of days later, we have funerals very quickly here in Ireland. And after the funeral, we went back to my grandmother's cottage, my grandparents' cottage, and everybody was upset and everybody was crying and everything. And I said to my mother, "Why is everybody so sad?" And she said, "Because Nanny's gone to heaven." And I said, "No, she's not. She's over there sitting beside Granddad." Okay. And you could hear everybody in the room go, this big gasp. And of course, then I was thinking, okay, they can't see her. There's something wrong here. Okay. So I suppose that was my first experience of knowing that what I could see was different than what everybody else saw. I
Mm.
went the long way around telling that story. I hope I
No,
answered
I
your
love
question.
it. I love the details because it really paints a picture of like your personal journey. And um, I'm curious to know if like that moment in time, did that affect how you went about developing your abilities? And then I'm also curious, what was your mom's role in this? Does she have these abilities as well? Has she cultivated the same or nurtured her abilities as well?
My mother didn't, unfortunately, but my mother was a single mother to both me and my sister.
Uh,
So, I think a lot of these things come down to time,
yeah.
and effort. And my mother was working 3 and 4 jobs at different times, in order to put food on the table. So there wasn't time for spiritual assessment. And you have to understand that where I come from in Ireland, I come from a place called Tipperary. You've probably heard the song, It's a Long Way to Tipperary. That's where I come from. And in my town, that's where they used to train the majority of the Catholic priests. We have this huge college in the town. It's now a teacher training college. But when I was growing up, every day when I was going to school, you could see 1,000 to 1,500 Catholic priests processing from the college to the cathedral for morning mass. Okay. It was hugely Catholic. You didn't talk about this stuff, when I was growing up. So it was kind of all done, under the table, I suppose, as you might say. Like my great grandmother lived in a cottage in the Irish countryside. People used to come and queue up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get a reading from her. It was all very hush hush. But she didn't have a telephone in the house anyway, so it was all the one. They couldn't contact her anyway. Any other way. There was no social media back then. Uh, but I suppose um, so. My mother didn't connect to spirit, but she understood from her own mother. She was very, very close to her own mother, and she understood. So, all my life, when I was growing up, I used to have this little boy that used to come into my bedroom every single night. His mother used to bring him into my room and tuck him into bed with me. Okay. And the two of us would sleep every night with this lady. And I used to say to my mother, she sits on top of the press. We call them presses, but you might call them cupboards. And she used to sit on top of the cupboard in my wardrobe, in my bedroom, and she would watch over us all night. And then in the morning, she would take her little boy and she would leave. So I used to always talk to my mother about this little boy and how I was, we were playing games, we were talking to each other and, where he came from and everything. But obviously, this wasn't a boy that was alive. This was a spirit boy. Okay. And he used to come in every single night. So my mother understood all of this. And my mother used to have a little trick because when I used to talk about somebody being around her and somebody coming into our house and everything, she always used to, just listen to me. She was great to sit and listen to me. But then she'd start putting up pictures of her relatives around the house, the ones that I maybe wouldn't remember or didn't meet. and she'd put up maybe a picture of her granddad or her grandmother or whatever. And until I noticed them, and then I'd start noticing them and go, that's the man that sits in the kitchen, or that's the lady that comes up the stairs. So I'd start to recognize the people that I was seeing then from the pictures. So she always said that she tried not to feed me the information. She tried to let it come out naturally, you know. So she was very encouraging. But of course, she was she was being guided by her mother in my early years as well, telling her, what to do, and, just to listen and not to give the information, not to tease the information, that I'll talk when I'm ready to talk. But so I missed my grandmother when she passed, because now all of a sudden I knew that not everybody saw it, and I didn't have her there anymore to guide me. Or at least I thought I didn't, because she did come back from spirit. Both her and her mother have always been there. But I wasn't ready for it when she did come through initially. So yeah, so I suppose that's how it happened, just talking to my mother and all of those kind of things. But, it was different here in Ireland. I didn't just go out at a young age and start reading for people. I was into my 30s before I started reading publicly, and it happened very much by accident.
Mm.
Shall I go into that story about how it happened that I came to read for people?
Yeah, I would love
So,
that. Yes.
like, I'd always done maybe some card readings or reading, energy for people, telling them what's coming up and how things are going to turn out. But there was a medium that was coming to the theatre in our local town, and that never happens. No medium ever comes to our little town here in Ireland. I was so excited, and I got the tickets really, really early. And so I went to this show, and sitting in front of me at this show, there was this couple, and the minute I sat down behind them, I could feel the energy from this couple. Anyway, the medium came on stage, she was doing her thing, and she was excellent, she really was. But I could feel the stress from this couple, building throughout the whole event. So when the interval came, and everybody was going to get their coffee or whatever, I just tapped this lady on the shoulder because I could feel her anxiety. And I just said to her, I said, if you're thinking that your son isn't here, I said, know that he is here. I said to her, but you're so anxious he won't leave your side to go up and speak to the lady on stage. And she turned and she looked at me and she went white. And I said, you are here for your son. And I started telling her things, you have his ashes like on the mantelpiece, you have this, you have that. And I started telling her all this information. And at the end, anyway, she just stood up and she gave me a big hug and she said, darling, she said, he's actually my grandson, but we raised him from the minute he was born. She said, he was my son. And she said, everything that you said was just so spot on. She said, and I thought that he didn't want to talk to me. She said, I've gone to see so many mediums and he's never come through. So anyway, I read for that lady in the interval, and then the medium came on and she did the second half of her show. At the very end of the show, okay, it's a small theatre, you might fit 150 to 200 people in it. It's not very big. So at the end of the show, after the applause, the medium left the stage, and there's always that moment of silence before people get up and start to leave. Well, this lady, quick as a wink, she stood up and she clapped her hands and she said, excuse me, everybody. She said, if you want a reading, you need to go and see this lady here. Never mind that woman on the stage. Okay. And I was like, I was mortified. We would say rua here in Ireland because it means red. When you go red with embarrassment. So that night, people queued up to get my phone number. And before I went home that night, I had 3 months of solid bookings. Yeah. Just from
Wow.
that lady standing up like that. And I was working full time. I didn't have time, for this. I had a full-time job. But I lent into it. I said, right, if this is what spirit want, and you will understand this, what's for you won't pass you, we say here in Ireland. Is that a saying that you have over in the States? What's for you won't pass you.
There's something similar. Yeah.
Similar. Yeah. So I lent into it and I started working Saturdays and I started working Sundays. And then I took parental leave and I cut down to 4 days a week in my full-time job. Then I cut down to 3 days a week. Then I cut down to 2 days a week. Then I ended up taking a career break, and the whole mediumship thing just took over. And that's how it began, just totally by accident. I never ever made a conscious decision that this was what I was going to do for a living. It found me. Okay.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah.
incredible. I also really loved how your mom, even though she didn't necessarily develop her own gift, she somewhat helped nurture you to continue, because I think so many, like you said in the beginning, so many of us do have these abilities. We just never either were taught or nurtured. In fact, a lot of us probably, like, especially in like my culture, like you don't talk to the dead. You don't,
Yes.
like, you have to suppress all of that. And so how beautiful and how your journey came about, but I'm sure that was not without any challenges. Or were there anything, is there anything that sticks out in terms of like what challenges you may have faced in this work, even maybe after you went full time as a psychic medium, and how were you able to overcome them?
I have to say, I suppose I was very lucky, okay, because I had that support all the time that I was growing up. Like I went into reading people without ever having done development. You
Mm,
know, I only did development programs after I went full time as a
mm,
medium. Okay. So it was very different for me. I didn't take a conventional route into working full time in this area. But everything is with its challenges because everybody has to find something that works for them. Okay. And personally, I've always been very sensitive. Okay. And then I was diagnosed with PTSD as an adult as well. So that, that really kind of threw my energy. And what I found was I had so many people coming to my house. Like I used to have cars queued up in the drive every single evening. Like the kids couldn't even go outside and play, because there was strangers outside in cars just queuing up for readings. And then when they come into my office, like I was overwhelmed with the energies and I wasn't sleeping. And, I was taken on board their problems, their stresses, their anxieties, their grief, and I was finding it hard to disconnect. And for a long time, I used to have this vision that when somebody walked out the door, that they had like a big backpack on them, or that they were carrying a suitcase, because this was my way of envisioning them taking their problems home with them. Because I knew if I didn't learn to send the problems home with them, that I would never work full time as this, that I would never stay doing it because my health was starting to deteriorate. So, after a while, I started doing online readings predominantly. Okay. And some mediums, like online readings, some people don't. But for me, it was a way to disconnect from the person's energy while connecting to the spirit energy. So my challenge has always been connecting to the spirit and not the person, if that makes sense. Because, I do both readings. I do mediumship, I do psychic. I know you know the difference. If anybody's listening doesn't, very quickly, I say the psychic connects to the living and the medium connects to the dead. Okay. So a psychic will read you what's going on in life, what's coming up in the future. The medium talks to dead people. Or as I say, just talks to dead people. Because to me, that's the easier of the two. Um, but yeah, and it's I had to divide the two readings up. Everybody wants everything when they come in one reading, but I have to prepare myself, and it's protecting my energy. Not from demons. I don't necessarily believe in evil spirits or demons or all that. That's a different area. But it was protecting my energy from taking on too much. Does that make sense?
absolutely. It's about like regulating your own nervous system and making sure you're not
Yes.
taking on other people's energy, which we all do naturally somehow.
Yeah.
But we're never taught on how to understand what our own energy is versus others and how to even release it. In fact,
Yes.
most of us are taught to repress our emotions and never ever taught in how to regulate, which is such an important part of being a human being. So yeah,
Hugely.
that totally makes sense.
Do you know what I say to people, especially when they're talking about, children that are maybe sensitive and stuff like this? Like when I was growing up in the 1980s, we had two television channels in Ireland back then, okay? And the television used to be on between noon, midday to about 9:30 or 10 p.m. And that was all the television we had. You couldn't stay up all night watching television because it just wasn't television to watch back then, okay? So we used to have this thing when I was growing up where we'd sit around telling stories.
Mm.
Okay. And with my grandmother, I always remember, she used to always tell us stories about her mother's spiritual experiences, her spiritual experiences, and everybody used to have stories to tell of things they heard, things they experienced. And my grandmother used to always ask a question. After everybody would tell a story, she'd always say, "How did that make you feel?"
Mm.
And it became part of my process, when I'm dealing with people. How does that make you feel? Because if we don't connect everything back to us, then it's just an experience. It's not a soul experience. And if we're connecting spiritually, it has to be a soul experience, you know, and that always stuck with me. How does it make you feel? And I have a tendency to ask that of everybody, when they're going through anything, when they've experienced anything, how does it make you feel? So, if anybody wants to develop, if anybody feels like they're stuck, you can do spiritual courses till they come out your ears.
Mm.
Okay. There's nothing like sitting down and talking to other people about their experiences, because that's when you have an aha moment. That's when you say, oh, that happened to me too. You know, when
Yeah.
I was about 12 years old, I was very close, to my first cousin. Okay. My mother's brother's daughter. Okay. My mother was very close to her, this particular brother. So, and me and my cousin were born 5 months apart. So we grew up like twins. Okay. If she wasn't sleeping at my house, I was sleeping at her house. So once when I was about 12 or 13 years old, we were out at her house anyway, and we were getting ready for bed. And she said to me, Sandy, I need to talk to you. And I thought, okay, what's wrong here? She's like, it wasn't like her to be serious. And she said, I think there's something wrong with me. And I was like, what's wrong? And she said, I hear people talking to me all day and all night. And I just went, well, thank God for that, because I see them. I said, I thought I was going mad. So she was hearing spirit talking to her. I was seeing them. We both thought that we, had something wrong with our brains. And yet we were scared to say it to each other for a long time.
Mm.
Isn't that amazing? And that's the way children are. They're afraid of being different. So we need to
Yeah.
normalize spiritual connections. We need, to normalize the fact that they're around us all the time, that they're helping us, that they're feeding into our life experience. And that was the point of the storytelling.
Oh, that's beautiful. I really love that because I think a lot of my listeners have children and whatnot and are wanting to nurture a lot of this. So this is so great that you're giving this feedback. There's also something that you said earlier that you never took a development class until after you became a full-time medium. I'm curious to know, did those development classes help in any way or fortify in any way, or did it just validate?
Both, because you're always going to learn new techniques. Nobody knows everything. I can learn so much off of everybody. So I will always be learning and developing for my whole life. And, finding out new perspectives and new ways of things and, different, you know, the way other people work, it kind of tweaks my own rituals for readings. So you always learn. I'm never going somewhere knowing everything. I'm always learning, but validating. And the big part of programs for me, whether they're online or whether they're in person, I see them like retreats. Because when you're working at home, you don't meet other mediums, you don't meet other holistic workers, you don't meet other light workers, so going to to a course, going to a program, whether it's online or not, you're meeting other people who are doing the same thing, who have the same outlooks, the same perspectives, the same abilities, and you don't feel like a freak anymore.
Yeah, no,
You
it's
just
so
don't.
true. That is
Mhm.
so true. Thank you for presencing that. I'm curious to know if you've ever been faced with skepticism. How do you navigate, disbelief from individuals who may be skeptical of psychic abilities?
Oh, I just nod my head and listen to them. There's no point in getting into an argument with anybody or trying to prove anything. As a medium, all I can do is provide evidence, okay, that life exists after death.
Yeah.
I can't prove anything to anybody. That's not my job. Okay. So if they come to me, I tell them I'm going to provide you with evidence. I'm going to give you as much information as I can. Whether you believe or not, that's totally up to you.
Yeah.
Okay. I do have rules in that, I don't read for anybody who would have had an alcoholic drink or, anything like that, obviously,
Yeah. Yeah.
or if somebody sits down in front of me and says, I'm only here because I'm curious, prove to me. I'll say, I don't do that. That's not what I'm here for. I don't think I'm the right reader for you, but I don't get into arguments. Maybe when I was younger, I tried to make people believe a little bit more, but everybody will come back to it when they're ready. I don't see the need to go looking for people to prove anything to them. Okay, there's
It's so
enough
true.
believers out there. Mm.
I get that same question a lot when I get interviewed, and it's like, my job is not to educate anybody.
Yeah.
They will start to ask, and they will start to come to me when the time is right. If there is a skeptic, um, same thing like you, like I just listen and say, yep,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. Because I think we all create our own reality, and people are at like different stages of their development. And it's not
Yeah.
for me to bring everybody up to like this stage, right? It's like, oh, I see where you're
Yes.
at, and that's okay. When you're
Yeah.
ready for more, and people start to get curious, and sometimes they poke and then they retreat, and then they come
Yeah.
back with more questions, and then they retreat, and then they're ready to like
I
talk about
yeah.
it all. So yeah,
I
totally right.
couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
And the majority of time, I wouldn't say all of the time, but I find the majority of time people only get curious after they've lost somebody.
it's
Unfortunately,
true.
but that's so natural. And then they feel guilty and they'll come and they'll go, "Look, I never really thought about this before. I know I probably should have." And I said, "Why should you? It wasn't within your realm of reality back then, but now it is. Now it's front and center and you're curious." I said, "There's nothing wrong with being curious. There's not, you know."
Yeah, and wanting to know that there is life after death, wanting to
Mhm.
know that your loved one, it does continue to live on, is like such an important part of that grief process, I think.
Oh, yeah. And just knowing that they're around. I mean, people just want to know that their loved one is somewhere, that they're seeing what's going on and what's happening, And when you do give that evidence to somebody, and I'm smiling as I'm talking to you because I did do a reading recently for somebody who, some people come and they're very closed, okay? And they won't even say yes or no. And I always say to people at the beginning of reading, I don't want to know the detail. It's none of my business. Just if I ask you, does it make sense? Will you give me a yes or a no? So I know that I'm on the right path, so that I know that I'm with the right person. Okay. And if I'm connecting with somebody, like I could connect with your great granddad that you never knew and have no memories of, we'll need to move past him. So anyway, this lady came and she sat there with her arms folded. She said, maybe, I don't know. It's possible. She didn't give a yes answer to anything, and my energy was hitting the floor, but I persevered. And anyway, she went away, and I knew she was kind of thinking, "This girl is scatty." Okay, about me. Anyway, uh, fast forward about 6 hours, only about 6 hours, my phone starts blowing up because she had gone back and checked everything with her family members and everything tallied up, and now she is an absolute firm believer, you
I'm
know.
sure of it.
Like, it wasn't my job, and I wasn't trying to force anything. She came to me for evidence. I gave her the evidence.
Yeah.
She wasn't taking it initially. And do you find this with people that they come with maybe one person or one specific thing on their mind that they want you to say, and nothing else makes sense to them?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
true. So I have a very similar story. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago, and my family gathered, and we hired a medium. We did it online, and the one person that has all the stories of the family forgot, and she ended up going to lunch or something with her husband, and she didn't show
Oh
up.
no.
And we were all like, and all these people showed up, right? All these spirits showed up, and we were
Yeah.
like, we don't know. The one person that would know is not here. We don't know. Maybe. Nobody could tell. My mom was there, my aunts were there. None of them knew, but the one person that knew wasn't there. And so, but we recorded it. And we were like,
Yes.
okay, we'll let you know. Right. And my aunt called, my aunt that missed the whole thing. She was like, everything made so much sense. This was so and so, and he
Yeah.
died here. And she validated every last
Everything.
detail. But during the time when we were with the medium, none of us could validate. It was
Yeah.
so
And it can
weird.
be
Poor medium.
disheartening. It can be disheartening for a medium because, it's not, I don't want to know. I just say, does it make sense to you? That's all I say, you know, and, it's, but even at the same time, even by you saying yes, part of what I'm taking or hoping to get from that is the vibration from your voice,
Yeah.
because that's what the spirit will connect to, is the vibration of your voice. They don't know me. Like, your grandmother did not know that medium. She was a stranger to your grandmother.
Right.
Okay. But even you guys saying we'll have to check, the vibration of your voice brought her closer.
Yeah.
So it wasn't for nothing, okay, that you got to do that, but
No,
it can throw, yeah.
it all worked out. And afterwards I gave the medium feedback. I'm like, we talked to my aunt, every last one checked out, and we were able to give her details because I knew that would help her out as well.
Absolutely.
Uh, and because I was also totally blocked, me being in my own grief and not really connecting, right? So we
Of
all
course.
did that kind of ritual where we all came together and we were like, okay, we need to just do this, and it really helped. I think in my heart of hearts, I think it did help with the grief
Yeah,
within my family. And yeah, like this is I think an absolute integral part of the grieving process.
it is. I would say to people though, because it's a while, it's a couple of years since your nan passed. I always say to people, leave at least 3 months after somebody's passed before you get a reading. It may be longer, but I say at least 3 months.
Yeah,
Okay. And there's two reasons for that. Do I have time to go into them?
absolutely. Yes.
So the first one is to allow the person who has passed to grieve. Okay. Because we think so much about ourselves. Okay. We've lost them. They're gone for us. Their life is over. We miss them. But what about the person who has passed? Okay. They also, they miss you. They miss all your other relatives. They miss their friends, maybe their work, their life, their social scene. They've lost everything and they have to grieve too. Okay, so we have to allow them time to grieve. We also have to allow them time to build up their energy. Okay, so say somebody who may have been ill before they passed. So, say if somebody, God forbid, had been fighting a cancer or something, okay, their energy is totally depleted before they leave the earth plane. So,
Mhm.
when they arrive in spirit, they're already exhausted, okay, with the low energy, and they need time to build that energy back up again.
Yeah.
Okay. The second reason that I say to people to not go so soon is because you have to deal with your own grief.
Mhm.
Some people will come with the expectation that they'll see the loved one in the room standing beside me. Such is grief. We just want it so badly. But I say deal with your grief first. Understand that yes, a reading is absolutely going to be, soulful for you. It's going to be it's going to help you deal with stuff just to know that they're around. But you have to accept that they're gone first.
That
So the
makes
grieving process.
so much sense because we did this like a month and a half after she had passed, and she never
Mhm.
showed, but everybody else showed up, great grandmothers, uncles, whatever, right? And in I have claircognizance, so it's really hard for me like to trust, right?
Of course.
And in my knowing, I was like, it's too soon. Like she's off like trying to like make sense of this. She's off like, and I felt like ancestors were with her trying
Of
to help her
course.
through it. And I was like, she needs to, and we were all going to come back 6 months later and do it again, and we just never did.
Mhm.
Um, but that was like my sense, like she's just not ready. But she was sending like my mom had some beautiful, really, really vivid dreams that made sense to all of us. I had some really vivid dreams that, like, then a year later was like, this was everything in my dream. And I knew she was going to be there in spirit for that. And I don't know, it was just really incredible. So I love that you said that because it kind of validates my,
Oh,
my
100%. Well,
thoughts and
if you think
experience.
about it logistically, right? Could you imagine if a big hand came down out of the sky and picked you up and dropped you in the middle of Siberia where nobody speaks English?
Yeah.
Okay. How long would it take you to have a conversation with somebody? You're not going to be able to talk to them immediately. And
Yeah.
I always say, as a rule of thumb, because we know time passes very quickly in the spirit world. So, as a rule of thumb, a month in earth time is like a day in spirit time.
Mhm.
So if your grandmother was only gone a month and a half, she was only gone a day and a half in spirit time. There was no way she had learned the language,
Yeah.
in order to be able to communicate with you guys. So, and I did an episode of my own podcast recently on this. I called it Unexpected Visitors, because when you do go for a reading, you were talking about all your other relatives coming in, which was beautiful, by the way, because they're
Yeah.
all letting like there's something to this. She's just not ready right now. But, sometimes, we get a grandfather or an uncle or an auntie or somebody popping in first in a reading. And immediately the person that I'm reading for, their energy hits the floor and they're saying, no, that's not who I was looking for. And I said, that's okay. I said, we don't have to just talk to one person. I said, we can say hello to this person and then move on. But the majority of time, somebody else comes through in order to open up the energy,
Yeah.
because the person who's recently deceased doesn't have enough energy to do that just yet. So they're being helped and supported by their soul group in the spirit world, you
Oh,
know.
that's so beautiful. Oh,
But be
thank you
open to
so much.
everything. You have to be open to everything.
I love that. So I have a question for you in terms
Sure.
of like a lot, and I've heard some people answer this question as well. If somebody dies of cancer or let's say Alzheimer's, like how does that affect them in the spirit world? Do they come back and are they complete again? Or is some element of this disease, are they carrying some element of this disease with them in the afterlife?
No. Okay. Well, we don't have a physical body in the afterlife. We're an energy. Okay. So think of it like this. Okay. If God forbid, and I touch wood, I'm very superstitious like that. If God forbid I had an accident, a car crash or something tomorrow, and I lost a leg. Okay. And years later, I passed over. Would you imagine me hopping around the spirit world for eternity? No. It's the same with anything, whether it's a physical injury or defect, whether it's an emotional one, like Ted Bundy, Hitler, they would all have had defects in their brain, but this is something that's attached to the physical body. And as soon as this lifetime is over, okay, and I would say think of this lifetime as an act in a play, okay? When this act comes to an end, we will take off this costume, so we'll shed this physical body, and we will return to the spirit world complete,
Mm,
totally whole, okay? No defects, nothing residual left over, okay? It's just something that happens to our physical body. And if we think about it, everybody has to die somehow.
yeah.
We do. We have to die somehow. At some stage, our body is going to give up on us, whether that's through accident, illness, or just old age. Okay, our body's going to give up on us. So it has to happen somehow, but it's only happening to the physical body, the soul, the spirit. It never dies.
That's
And it's not
beautiful.
affected. It's not affected. So don't worry about that.
What recommendation would you give to someone that is interested in maybe exploring or developing their own psychic abilities?
What I say to everybody, and this might sound harsh, but I say work on yourself first. Okay. And I've actually been doing this with a group of people just recently, because so many people say, right, I want to do this. And they jump into doing psychic development or mediumship development or any of those things. Okay. Which is fine. But you're not ready to connect if you're not at your full strength in your own energy. So,
Mhm.
a lot of people who are grieving say, right, I'm going to go and learn mediumship, but they haven't dealt with their grief. They haven't adjusted to their new life. Okay. They haven't got past the trauma of what they've gone through. So I say, work on yourself first, bring yourself back up to full strength, and then start your connection. Because everything that you do with regard to spirituality, psychic work, healing, whatever, it requires your energy to be high. You need to vibrate at a higher level. You can't do that if you're still in the depths of trauma or grief. So start by working on yourself. I'm not saying take years to travel around the world and um, go to Bali and meditate and stuff, but maybe do a self-development course, maybe do some guided meditations, maybe go to counseling if it calls for it. But spend 6 to 12 months building yourself up and then see how you feel.
It's so
Okay?
true. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
The shadow work, the
Yes.
healing within yourself first is it just once you do that and also once you like figure out who you really are, like your gifts just naturally come online. It's a really beautiful thing to see.
And I would say to people too, if they are going to develop, it would be wonderful because there's never, ever, ever going to be too many light workers on this earth. But if you are going to develop, be prepared, okay? Because once you start developing one modality, the others will start popping up. And I liken this to, do you remember the film? You're probably too young, but back in I think it was 1990, a film with Patrick Swayze and Whoopi Goldberg,
Oh
called
yeah, you're
Ghost.
so kind. Yes. I grew up in the 80s too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I love that movie. And I love that the fact that as soon as she connected with one spirit, all the others started to come in. And that is it's so realistic because that's exactly how it happens. And then you get comfortable with working with mediumship, and all of a sudden your psychic abilities happen, and then your healing abilities happen, and all of these things start popping in. So make sure you're ready for this transition,
Yeah.
before you go down that route.
It's so true. Is there anything else we haven't covered that you would like to presence today?
I don't think so. I think, just getting the message out there that there is life after death, that it's not just all woo woo entertainment stuff because, a lot of us, by law have to advertise ourselves as entertainers, you know. So I think just getting the word out there that there is, a lot to it, that you need to look after yourself predominantly. Like there was, I don't know if you've ever heard of the late great Mavis Patilla. She passed away a couple of years ago. She was a British based medium, and I always remember she said once that you can't be so spiritual as to be of no earthly value. So you can't live in the clouds all of the time. Okay. Just the same way that
Mm.
spirit don't sit on clouds playing harps all day. Okay. So we have to live in the real world too. Okay. So look after yourself, look after your energy, but do get curious about it. Do, watch YouTube videos, do research it, do read books. Any book that you could get your hands on by D. Scott Rogo. Have you heard of D. Scott Rogo?
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
just love his stuff. I mean, God rest his soul, he was very young when he passed. But I mean, imagine he spent his life as a parapsychologist and then to be murdered in his 40s and be flung into the spiritual realm just like that. So his books can be hard to get, but anything that you can read by D. Scott Rogo is a
Mhm.
great place to start. Okay. Or my favorite book to start with is, and not by myself, a guy called Stephen Turov. Okay, and it's called Seven Steps to Eternity. And I picked it up in an antique bookstore in London when I was about 14 years old or 15 years old. And it's been republished since, so you can now get it back on Amazon again. But I recommended it to everybody. I'd like to think I had a part in it being republished after all those years. But yeah, it tells the story of a young soldier who died in the Battle of the Somme and his journey into the spirit world and how he learned to cope with it and how he came back and connected with his parents and all that kind of stuff. So I loved that book because everything that I had been seeing in visions as a child was just described to a T in that book. When
Mm.
you feel like you've found your Bible.
Yeah.
So be curious, guys, but make sure you look after your own energy while you're doing it.
I love that. Thank you so
Mhm.
much. Can you share with us, like, what are your offerings? Do you have any programs? What
Yeah,
can
sure.
people get excited about?
So yeah, so I do psychic and mediumship readings all the time. Okay. You'll find all the information on sandiebyrne.com, which I'm sure you'll share in the podcast description. And yes, I do teach mediumship. I plan to begin another program in September of this year. And that's why I've been developing a new module, which I've been trialing with a small group this past couple of weeks, about personal development, which will actually be, I've called it the self-love amplifier. So it's going to be the first module in the new program so people can build themselves up before they jump into the mediumship. Yeah, so I'll be starting that in September of 2024. So you will
Oh,
find all details as available on my website also.
that's exciting. Thank you so much for coming on. And
Thank
yes,
you.
all those details will be down below in the show notes. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this, please let us know in the comments, and like and subscribe. And I will see you next week.